You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Welcome to Unbiased Science,
where we bring scientific method to the madness.
We're your hosts, Dr. Jess Steier
and Dr. Sarah Scheinman.
And we are having all of the tech issues in 2025. Last week, it was Sarah's laptop giving us trouble. This week, it's mine. So I am on my phone, in my phone right now. If you're watching on video, I'm really like you're getting an up nostril shot. So I apologize, but the show must go on. And this week we are joined once again by the amazing Dr. Kristen Panthagani to talk all about the microbiome, because y'all have questions about the microbiome. And we are joined by not one, but two people who have expertise on this topic. So I'm going to be doing a lot of listening and learning. But just to kick things off, Kristen, you're what I refer to as a mudfud. You have both an MD and a PhD. Can you just remind listeners what your credentials are?
So I did my MD and my PhD at Baylor College of Medicine. I do not speak for the institution. I should throw that out there. I speak for myself, but my PhD was in studying the human microbiome. Technically, it was in genetics, but my focus of my thesis was metagenomics and studying the human microbiome. And then since that time, in particular, when the pandemic started, which was my last year of grad school, I've launched into the world of science communication and health literacy. And I'm now an emergency medicine resident at Yale. I also don't speak for that institution. I have to put all the disclaimers in there. And I now focus more on studying how we can improve health literacy and health communication. But microbiome is my roots. It is the topic I fell in love with at the beginning of grad school. And so I'm very excited to be here to chat about it today.
And Kristen, where can people follow your work? Kristen is truly an incredible science communicator, and you should absolutely follow her. Can you let folks know? And we'll link to this in our show notes.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I have a newsletter called You Can Know Things. It's both its own website at youcanknowthings.com. And then I recently put it on Substack as well. And then on social media, I'm KM Panthagani on basically everything. I'm on Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, occasionally on X now, Facebook. So you can find me there.
All the places.
It's too many. I am lamenting the decentralization of social media because it's exhausting posting things in like 5 different places. I miss the days when it was a little simpler.
And this is a topic for a whole other episode, but it's, you have different audiences on different platforms,
right.
Different formats, different types of messaging resonate differently on different platforms. So it's a whole thing. But, Sarah loves a definition. I know we're going to be kicking off with a definition of microbiome, which is the topic of today's episode. But I'm hoping we can get to, discuss the fact that there's the gut microbiome. There's all different microbiomes, right? Just today, I got a message from a wonderful science communicator. She's an OBGYN, and we're going to tackle the topic of, I guess, the vaginal microbiome, because now there's all types of things about the type of delivery, if you're giving birth, the type of delivery, if it's vaginal or C-section, that somehow, that impacts things. So there are all kinds of things that we could talk about. But Sarah, do you want to start us with a definition? And then I'm going to let the two of you really guide the conversation. And actually, one more thing. Sorry, here I am with my third cup of coffee. So apologies. But the reason that this is such a hot topic is because, every time I open up social media, I see, at home microbiome test. And, here's a supplement to quote unquote, optimize your microbiome. So this has really turned into an industry. Microbiome is a buzzword. So what are we talking about, Dr. Scheinman?
I think I want to turn this one over to Kristen. I think Kristen might be a good one to define this term for us, because I feel like oftentimes when we hear microbiome, we are referring to the gut microbiome, but like there are different types of microbiome. So like what even is a microbiome? Like what are we talking about here?
So very generally speaking, the microbiome just refers to a community of microorganisms that lives in a particular niche. And most often when we talk about the human microbiome, we're thinking about the gut microbiome. And that's simply because that's where the vast majority of the bacteria that interact with us and live in and on us, that's where they live, is in the gut, in particular the colon. But like you were mentioning, Jess, there's bacteria all over us and in different orifices. So there's an oral microbiome, there's a vaginal microbiome, there's microbiome unique to the nose, there's microbiome on your skin. And this, again, is just the community of microbes that live there. And when we say microbes, a lot of them are bacteria, but there's also sometimes fungi, viruses. So it's not exclusively bacteria, but most often when we talk about it and think about it, people are focusing more on the bacterial microbiome.
I think I'm going to be not the foil, but I'll represent. This will be sort of a herd from the herd because I have heard so many questions from people. Okay, I guess, can you help us understand? We hear the phrase good bacteria and bad bacteria.
Oh, yes.
So, Kristen, what's the scoop on that? And how does that factor into this conversation?
So first of all, we'll say that is a simplification.
I was about to say that. I was going to say every time we're referring to anything in science as like good or bad, quote unquote, there's this like good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, like all these things where like whenever I hear like good or bad with regards to anything in physiology, all kinds of red flags go up for me. Like, I don't know about you, Kristen.
Yeah. Well, so as a science communicator, I'm torn because on the one hand, we do need to make things simple so that people understand them. The problem becomes when people take those simplified classifications and then start making conclusions from them that aren't actually accurate.
Yeah.
So for a general audience, for broad understanding, I think calling things good and bad microbes is reasonable in terms of just trying to help people understand what's going on. So to answer your question, Jess, good bacteria are what we call, or probiotics is a term we often use for that. And those are the bacteria that many of them that naturally occur in our gut and have been associated with positive functions, associated with health, things that are actually helping us, as opposed to the bad bacteria. Those are the ones that can make us sick. And again, that is an oversimplification because sometimes the bacteria that can make us sick are still living on our surface of our skin and aren't necessarily causing harm at that time. As somebody who works in the hospital, the chance that I am colonized with MRSA is extremely high, but that does not mean I have an active MRSA infection right now. MRSA is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, which is can be a nasty bacterial infection, but also a lot of people just have staph living on their skin, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're infected at that time.
So would you say it has to do a little bit with like the concentration of the bacteria, like the amount of a certain bacteria or pathogenic bacteria that we have?
So I would say it more has to do with whether or not there's an active infection going on. And certainly when there is an active infection, the bacteria are proliferating and going in places they shouldn't be and taking over. But amount probably has something to do with it, but I would not use that as like a strict cutoff. But then the probiotics we often think about are like bifidobacteria, lactobacillus. These are bacteria that are found in the gut and have been associated with positive health functions. And when we talk about probiotics, those are often the bacterial species that people are looking at.
Now, Kristen, you're saying some things that I feel like I'm seeing sold to people, right? So probiotics, that's a booming industry. And some of the bacteria that you're mentioning or probiotics, we see marketed in yogurts or in supplements or whatever it is. So I don't know. I know, and I just total disclaimer, usually I have show notes in front of me and an outline. I have nothing. I have absolutely nothing. So I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. So Sarah, you have it in front of you. Can you, before I ask questions about probiotics, where do we go next?
Well, I was thinking like there are three terms that we hear that sound very similar that are kind of thrown around oftentimes. So we have probiotics, we have prebiotics, and then we have antibiotics. So Kristen, could you maybe differentiate what these three things are? And, I know they're very different from one another, but could you maybe help parse these out for us, please?
Let's start with antibiotics, because I think that's the one people are most familiar with. So antibiotics are molecules that kill bacteria, and they're used as drugs to treat bacterial infections. So penicillin is one of the earliest antibiotics that was discovered. It was produced by, I believe, it was a type of fungi. And now we have all sorts of antibiotics. So those are drugs that are given to treat bacterial infections, and they kill them. Probiotics are what we were just chatting about, which are actual bacteria. And the term is usually applied to bacteria that have been shown to have a positive health benefit. And then prebiotics are the food for the bacteria. So they're fibers that our digestive system doesn't necessarily digest, but the bacteria in our gut feed on them and digest them and turn them often into helpful chemicals or bioproducts that then our intestines absorb and do cool stuff with. I'm gonna put a note here that yes, absolutely, all these things are being marketed. In particular, I'm seeing prebiotics like added to soda. But please know, if there's one thing you get out of this show, it's that the thing you need is fiber. Prebiotics are naturally occurring in all sorts of plants. And that is in my opinion, the easiest and simplest way to get them in your diet. You don't need some fancy prebiotic supplement. You simply need to eat dietary fiber, which is found in all sorts of plants that we already eat, fruits, vegetables, grains, things like that. So this is, I will confess, this is a slight pet peeve of mine when I see prebiotics like marketed as like this fancy supplement that costs a ton of money. And I'm just like, no, just go eat a plant. Like, we already have so many prebiotics.
Well, and that's why it's pretty universally accepted that plant-rich diets are so important for us, right? I mean, aside from the carnivore bros, how are the carnivore bros going to the bathroom? Wait, Sarah, hold on.
Who are the carnivore bros?
Sarah is our social media virgin here. And so you've never heard of the carnivore diet?
I mean, I think I have. Like, that's a meat-based diet, right? Like, that's...
Well, there are some people who will eat exclusively meat. And I'm just confused. I mean, I don't know if they're supplementing or how that. Oh, I'm deadly serious here.
Just meat, nothing else?
Yeah, I got to tell you. Okay, here's a little secret. I was added. I don't know if I was being trolled. And Kristen, I think you know this. I don't know if I told you this, but you know this. There's a carnivore bro chat on social media, and somehow I got added to it. And I don't know if I was being trolled or not, but yes, suffice it to say, there is a group of very vocal advocates for eating an exclusively meat diet. Kristen, based on what you're saying, is it safe to assume that you feel that that's problematic?
I think any form of extreme diet is not ideal. And in particular, one that completely lacks dietary fiber is going to be problematic, I think, for the microbiome. Yeah.
I mean, I think a theme that comes up a lot in this podcast when we're talking about any health or science topic is like balance is key. You don't want too much of anything, really. But
these people are very vocally anti-plant. And that's the thing that's very confusing to me. I think they talk the premises about how our, like the cavemen used to eat. I'm not even going to sit here and pretend that I know it. But anyway, I'm getting us too far away. We were talking about prebiotics, which you're saying, fiber, and fiber is super important. Okay. And we can easily get fiber and just have a handful of greens, right? Or vegetables, or
veggies, fruits, grains, and there's a ton of different types of prebiotics, and you'll get a diversity of that with a balanced diet.
All right. So sort of like shifting gears a little bit, I want to say that, and like, I'm not on social media, but I am, sort of in the biomedical field, and it does sort of seem like the microbiome these days is connected to like pretty much every disease under the sun at this point. I mean, like, it's a burgeoning field of research. But why is that, Kristen? Like, why are we hearing so much about the microbiome with regards to health and disease?
So I'll start by saying the microbiome is genuinely, there's good data that it's connected to a whole bunch of different diseases. The ones that come to mind immediately are like metabolic disease. Again, that's also very directly related to diet. So diet and microbiome go hand in hand, because what you eat, your microbiome eats, at least for your gut microbiome. There's good data to say it's connected in with immune regulation. For example, if you totally take away the microbiome of mice, germ-free mice, their immune systems are very messed up. And then you're going to talk about this more, Sarah, but there's this whole like gut-brain axis and how the microbiome can actually potentially impact our like cognitive functioning. And that's still a very active area of research. So I'm gonna caveat everything I'm about to say that there's definitely the microbiome is tied in with a whole bunch of different physiological processes in our body, and we're still actively figuring those out. But I also want to take a step back and kind of help you understand how all this research came to be, and why for a while it just seemed like every day there was a new news article that's like, oh, the microbiome's connected to this, and the microbiome's connected to this. And just put a little bit of skepticism and critical thinking in with those news articles. So what happened was, it used to be that in order to study bacteria, we had to be able to grow them in a lab. Mm-hmm. And that really limited our ability to study the microbiome, because a lot of the bacteria are very difficult to actually grow. If you take, a stool sample, which is how we most often study the gut microbiome, and you try to grow it, some of the species will grow, but there was a lot of species that we just didn't know the right growth conditions. They don't want oxygen. There's a whole bunch of different things they do and don't like. And so that made it difficult to study microbiomes at scale. And then what happened is, as sequencing methods, so DNA sequencing, as those got better and cheaper, we figured out how to study microbiomes without growing them. And instead, what we do now, there's still the culture-based research, but a lot of what you'll see in the microbiome literature is we take, say, a stool sample, we extract all the DNA, and then we sequence it. And then we use genetic tools on the back end, computational based tools, to figure out what bacteria are in there based on their DNA. And so that bypasses the step of having to actually grow the bacteria. And it meant that we could all of a sudden easily figure out what bacteria are in a sample with some level of accuracy, simply by running a single sequencing experiment on that sample. So that made studying the microbiome all of a sudden way, 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 way easier. And then, of course, sequencing methods got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So it just opened the door to study the microbiome in a way that never had happened before.
So, Kristen, is this where the Human Microbiome Project sort of originated?
Yeah, that was one of the early efforts to once these methods were available. I mean, it wasn't immediately, but in kind of that initial era of microbiome research, to map out the microbiomes at different body sites. So they looked at stool, they looked at the mouth, I think vaginal, I can't remember all the different ones they did in that particular study.
Just a quick question to help orient me in terms of timeline. Are you talking the last decade? How new is this scientific advancement?
Yeah, so the Human Microbiome Project was published in 2012.
Okay.
Which is when I started my MD PhD program. And this is when I was first the microbiome is awesome. So it was I'd have to look at the exact publication dates, but
got it.
The last 2 decades. Let's go with that. And so what happened is, now that these methods were super easy and all of a sudden this was a hot topic, a whole bunch of people jumped in and said, oh, I wonder if the microbiome's connected to my disease, and was running these experiments of let's see if the microbiome's connected to disease X and disease Y, and doing these experiments that ultimately, a lot of them were just correlation studies. And so, and then the second thing that's tricky about microbiome research, in particular with this sequence-based method, is you get so many different bacteria, and it's very easy to identify what we call spurious correlations, which is, I hope this isn't too in-depth for the audience, but basically, whenever we test an experiment or test a hypothesis, there's always a chance that we're going to get some significant results purely by chance. Mm-hmm. So if you do one experiment, that chance is smaller. But if you do, say, 1,000, if you test 1,000 different hypotheses, the chance that something's going to come up, quote, statistically significant, and it's actually just noise, is quite high. And so there's methods that we're supposed to use to correct for that, but they're not always used appropriately. And so what ended up happening is there was an explosion of people doing these correlation studies. And that's where you were getting all these headlines of, oh, the microbiome might be connected to this, the microbiome might be connected to this. And then as people start digging in more, it's harder. It's easy to identify a correlation. To actually verify, oh, this disease actually is connected, is much more difficult. So that is the long answer to say, why does it seem like the microbiome is connected to everything? It's because all of a sudden it was easier to study it. Everyone jumped in, and we got a lot of correlative studies, but not all of them have panned out to be a true connection.
And if I could also like jump in with like one of the reasons why I think like this type of analysis, when we're talking about the microbiome, like it can be like this type of data can be kind of messy, is because it's really hard to think of, because we have these trillions of microbes just like living within us, and they have all of this genetic material that like is distinct from ours, like, but also a part of us. It gets really hard to think of like any health or disease condition that like isn't connected to that. Because I mean, at least when we're talking about the brain, which is, of course, what I study, the brain doesn't exist in isolation, right? Like, so if we have like all of these microbes that are living within us, like of course that's going to be influencing things. But the question is parsing out how exactly.
And then how much of an impact is the microbiome relative to other physiological processes? Because yes, I agree with you. The microbiome is like very, I don't, this isn't technically right, but I sort of think of it as like an organ. It's like just another physiological system that's in our bodies. And so how does that, quote, again, nobody come and be like, Kristen called the microbiome an organ. I'm not inventing a new organ, but it's just a way of thinking about it. But how does that impact the rest of our body? And so sometimes for some diseases, it's going to be super important. And then for other ones, it's like, that's not really the main thing driving it.
Can I ask a question? So I guess this is, again, sort of a pseudo herd from the herd segment, because a question that we get all the time, these at-home microbiome tests. Now, my understanding, correct me if I'm mistaken, Kristen, is that the microbiome is changing constantly. It's constantly evolving. Like I'm sitting here, I'm having a sip of my coffee with my delicious coconut creamer here. And every time I drink it, isn't my microbiome changing? And I guess, like, how fluid is the microbiome? Like, are there parts that are, I don't know what the word, like, consistent, but then there are others that are other parts of it that are changing? I don't know if my question is making sense, but the reason I'm asking it is because the criticism I've seen of the microbiome test is that they're truly just taking a snapshot in time, and it's difficult to make these tests are often marketed like, take this microbiome test, and then it's like diagnostic, like, oh, you have this is wrong with you, and this is your risk of this disease, and this that. It's like, how are that something doesn't smell right to me. Kristen, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd have to look at this. I haven't done a deep dive into the specific home test, so I can't comment on like any specific one to say, is this useful or not? But generally, so to answer your first question, how fluid is the microbiome? It sort of depends on how far you've zoomed in or out on the specific species. So generally, we see, if you look at someone over their lifetime, the early period of life is a period of rapid change in the microbiome. And then as kids get a little bit older, it's a little bit more steady. So that's sort of a big zoomed out picture of microbiome development. And this, again, we're talking about the gut microbiome. But Jess, you're right that there's fluctuations from day to day. So if you take a sample from somebody and then take the sample 3 days later, those are not going to be identical. And there's, in particular, dietary changes have a big impact on the microbiome. So if we're zoomed in a little bit more, you're going to see those fluctuations. And then things like antibiotics can, at least temporarily, you can sometimes see changes with antibiotics. But then often the gut microbiome is pretty good at rebounding. Again, this is going to be connected in with whatever you're eating. So I guess if there's one take home you have of this entire episode, it's that your diet is the most important thing for your microbiome. And in particular, I'm going to say fiber like 10 times. Fiber. Like that's really,
fiber.
You want to know, that is, you've won 90% of the microbiome game if you're getting.
So save your money. You don't need to buy those very expensive fancy powders and supplements for $100 a pop. You just literally have a little salad, right? And build in.
Get a bag of spinach.
I am always a proponent of just eating healthy food over getting the same nutrients in the form of a pill. Yeah, that's my personal bias. Again, I'm not giving, I'm sorry, I have to like caveat myself like 17 times. This is not official medical advice. Talk to your doctor if you have specific health questions, but this is my personal practice for myself, is just to try to get enough veggies.
Now, Captain Sarah, I know you're steering the ship of this episode, but we get so many questions all the time about probiotics. we acknowledged already there's a major market for this. I'll be transparent that this page has been critical of probiotics in the past, based on some very real data. I do think that generally speaking, a lot of the benefits tend to be overstated. But I have also read some studies that show that there might be some promise for certain probiotic treatments. So can you just comment on that? Like, should we be consuming? Do we need to run out and, have probiotics or buy probiotic supplements or anything like that?
The world of probiotics is tricky and messy. I will say that I personally do not take any probiotic supplements. Again, I would much rather feed the good bacteria in my gut than try to so here's one thing. Probiotics, one of the big questions, if there is a supplement that you're taking, is how much of that bacteria actually makes it all the way to the gut, where it would live. And then is it going to flourish? So if you're feeding you're giving the good bacteria the food they need by eating enough dietary fiber, those ones will flourish that you already have in there. But if you're taking probiotic supplements, but then your diet is not giving them the food that they need, you're still not eating a super healthy diet, then that's sort of just a drop in the bucket of the bacteria. There's trillions of bacteria in there. So you're just putting a tiny drop in the ocean when you take a probiotic supplement.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because there are only certain when you're talking about a probiotic, there are only certain types of bacteria that are easily cultured in the lab. So there are only certain types that can actually be contained within any kind of supplement that you can take orally. Right. So, one of the things that I think is really important, at least with the gut microbiome, is like microbial diversity. So you need a whole lot of different types of bacteria in order to reap the benefits. And that's what you get from your diet. Right, Kristen?
Yeah. And I would say, so to answer Jess's question, so there's kind of two different categories of probiotics. There's probiotics that are regulated as supplements. And I'm sure this has come up, Jess and Sarah, multiple times, that supplements, the FDA does not require any sort of testing to say whether they're helpful or not. The FDA's job is purely to have some oversight into manufacturing and things like that. But there's, if you buy a probiotic supplement, even if it's strongly implied it's going to help your health, there's actually no data that company had to generate to actually show that's true. Versus probiotics and kind of probiotic related products can be evaluated in the FDA category of a drug. And then they go through the rigorous testing. And then the companies that are working on those products have to actually show data that hey, this is helping. So there are studies that are looking at whether probiotics are helpful for certain diseases, and some of them are showing promising data. But it's kind of but some of them use the supplement version, and some of them don't. So it's a little bit messy. We'll summarize it with the data is messy. There's some promising data for probiotics for certain diseases. But the vast majority of the supplement marketing, at least from what I've personally seen, doesn't have good data behind it to say it's actually going to help.
100%. And yes, Kristen, as you noted, this has come up so many different times, not just talking about probiotic supplements, but every type of supplement. And when we do see studies that do independent testing of these supplements, all different types. There are lots of issues with labeling, where there are ingredients that are not disclosed or, inaccurate, levels of ingredients and all that good stuff. So totally on the same page. So I guess a follow-up question is, what about after we've taken antibiotics? Because there's there's this idea that you take antibiotics, it wrecks your microbiome, it's killing the good and bad bacteria. And it is often recommended, I see this all the time, that after taking antibiotics, you should take a probiotic. What say you?
I think I'd want to do a deep dive into the literature on that before giving a definitive answer. I was perusing some studies yesterday And I found one meta-analysis that suggested it doesn't make a big impact. But I think to give a definitive answer on that, I'd want to dig a little bit more.
Fair enough. I respect that. But yeah, people they're taking probiotics after antibiotics. I know there's a very big, there's a side of TikTok that's all about taking syringes of yogurt and inserting it into the vagina for the vaginal microbiome. Oh, that's a very, very, very
serious?
But this is pre-TikTok. I mean, this is a very common thing. I think that some people do that to, and I'm using air quotes here. I haven't looked into this. I'm not an OB/GYN. I do not have the expertise, but to treat yeast infections as an alternative to the antifungal treatment that you can get in the pharmacy. So there's all kinds of stuff. Oh yeah.
Do we have to say it? Like, please don't put yogurt in your vagina.
Well,
do we have to say? Does this need to be said?
I think it has to be said.
Okay.
You said it.
You heard it here.
You heard it here first.
Folks.
All right, Sarah, what I know you wanted to talk about the gut brain. Can we go there, or am I taking us off topic here?
No, absolutely. I would love to talk about the microbiome in the brain. And it's really, we can't really talk about the microbiome in the brain without first talking about something that's called the gut-brain axis. The gut-brain axis is kind of like a two-way street of communication between your intestines and your brain. And it's how the gut and the brain communicates. So when we're talking about the gut, it's predominantly the small intestine, which is covered with what are called villi, which is like little protrusions, finger-like protrusions on the inside of the intestinal wall. And the villi consist of a bunch of different types of cells, but there's one specialized type of cell that's called a neuropod. And neuropods are really cool. They pretty much act as like our gut sensors, quote unquote, because what they do is they actually synapse with nerves, and in particular nerves such as like our vagus nerve, which runs down the trunk of our body. And neuropods can be activated by mechanical, thermal, or chemical sensors, such as nutrients, and also the bacteria that's present in the gut lumen, which is also known as our microbiome. So gut bacteria, some certain gut bacteria can produce neuroactive compounds, and among these neuroactive compounds, like they can also produce and be activated by neurotransmitters. So we know that like neurotransmitters, specifically serotonin, but also to a lesser extent GABA, directly impact how neuropods signal to the brain. There is also a very distinct link between the gut microbiome and brain function in health and disease. We kind of touched on this a little bit, but my area of research is Alzheimer's disease. So there is a whole area of research that's called the Alzheimer's Gut Microbiome Project, which was started by the National Institute of Health. And the idea behind the Gut Microbiome Project or the Alzheimer's Gut Microbiome Project specifically, is that it's aimed at mapping out how the gut microbiome in specifically the gut microbiome, changes at different stages of Alzheimer's disease. And there is some evidence to suggest that diet could be used to change our gut microbiome and support the brain during aging, because aging, among other things, reduces the diversity of the gut microbiome, which we kind of talked about a little bit, Kristen, is that like diversity of your microbiome is really, really important for maintaining that like healthy balance. And we know that that aging actually reduces the diversity of gut bacteria. Just as a natural part of aging. So this like gut dysbiosis is something that occurs naturally in aging. And we know that may have a connection with Alzheimer's disease pathogenesis.
Whoa. Okay.
That was a lot. I'm sorry. I kind of rambled for a little bit there. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but in a nutshell, like I'm
girl crushing over here. Now that I love it. So, well, I guess because something I hear often going back to antibiotics is that after a person's taken antibiotics, people, and I guess now I'm talking more like depression, anxiety, and not so much what you're talking about, but people will say, oh, after I've taken antibiotics, I feel like I'm more inclined to feel depressed. And, lots of people saying, oh, it's this gut gut-brain connection, and we've wiped out the bacteria and that. And I honestly, and I don't know if you can comment on that at all, but I mean, obviously, as a data scientist, my brain goes, okay, well, if you're not feeling well, if you're taking an antibiotic, obviously there's some other issue going on. Could that also be impacting mental, emotional health? But I don't know. I don't know. Have you heard that or looked into that at all?
I don't think that the data is quite as strong when it comes to the gut-brain axis on like emotional regulation. So,
okay.
I mean, I guess a little bit like, if you suffer from like IBS or something like that, or irritable bowel syndrome, like, of course, if you're eating foods that are going to contribute to the inflammatory response of your guts, then you're going to feel worse.
Right.
But I think that's more physiological than psychological.
Kristen, have you heard this? Am I making this up? Do you know what I'm talking about? Or I don't know if that's something
I have not heard that specific thing of like antibiotics causing changes in mood.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard of the sort of the hypotheses and research connecting the gut microbiome and like mental health. Again, sorry, you're gonna get this answer from me a couple times. The field of microbiome research is so broad that I will, that one I'm not going to comment on without doing a deep dive. But I guess one thing I can say is I think there's this idea that when we take antibiotics, that it like completely wipes out our microbiomes. And that is not true. It's not like it kills every bacteria in you. There's so many bacteria in you. It can kill some. And of course it kills the infection, but it's not like you all of a sudden have an empty colon when you take antibiotics.
Well, and also there are different types of antibiotics for a reason, right? I mean, they target different things. There are broad spectrum ones, but they still target different, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I'm hearing, and actually I really appreciate that you keep saying like, this is a burgeoning field of research. I guess that's my big thing, is that people are overstating what we know definitively about the microbiome. Like what I'm getting is the microbiome, there's no question it's hella important. We're getting more and more We're getting more and more evidence that it is impacting different things. It sounds like, and all different types of physiological things, right? Like Sarah, you're talking about the brain connection. There's all links to other health outcomes, but we just don't know. I mean, I don't even, it just feels like we're at the tip of the iceberg here.
We're scratching the surface.
The surface. So I guess that's my big thing. My big gripe is when people market things as, so take this test, it'll give you a profile of your health based on your microbiome, or take this product and it'll miraculously improve.
Over certain.
Exactly. Yeah. So we know that there's something going on. And then just to recap, because we get all these questions about probiotics, like, Chris, I'm so glad you made that distinction between supplements and actual like regulated drug probiotics. Like, a lot of it is marketing, and it seems like we're overselling the benefits of probiotics, but there might be some benefits for specific health outcomes when we know exactly what's in the probiotic we're taking. Prebiotics, it's no question that they're important, and fiber is critically important. And we don't need to buy expensive things unless your healthcare provider, there's some issue going on, and you do need to supplement with extra fiber.
We're going to caveat all of this with if your doctor tells you to take a specific probiotic or a specific prebiotic for your specific condition, then please listen to them.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is more general, like just when you hear a commercial, like, oh, you should take this probiotic for your health.
Or an influencer.
Yes. Or an influencer, like how much data is there actually behind that?
I was just reading, I don't know if it was WAPO or NPR, some outlet just said, what supplement do you actually have to take? And, first, immediately I was like, oh gosh, what is it? What supplement company paid for this? But I think the punchline was, it was a fiber, but it was, what is it? Psyllium husk? Do you know what that is? Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Psyllium husk? No? Okay. But anyway,
I'm still going to say, just eat some plants, man.
Yeah.
Buy a bag of spinach.
Well, so that was my thing. Like, you really don't, again, unless your healthcare provider says otherwise, you don't need to get your fiber from the supplement. You can just have
lots of dietary fiber.
Exactly.
But very quickly going back to the antibiotic point, I think one thing that's important to bring up. So there is an infection called C. diff, Clostridium difficile. And that is very connected in with antibiotics and decreased diversity of the microbiome. However, it's often people have to take multiple rounds of antibiotics. It's not just like, usually it's not like, oh, one course of antibiotics and all of a sudden you get C. diff. But that was one of the very early successes of microbiome research where so C. diff is a bacterial infection that can take over the gut microbiome and make people very, very, very sick. And the treatment is a different antibiotic. And sometimes that treatment works, but sometimes that treatment doesn't work and people will get repeated C. diff infections. And then early on, they tried doing what's called a fecal microbiota transplant, which is where you actually take stool from a screened healthy donor. Do not do this at home.
People do this at home. Wait, hold on. There's a pun there. They do this at home.
And replenish that person's microbiome. And the early studies were, it worked very, very well. So when I'm saying that antibiotics don't wipe out your microbiome immediately, of course, some people are for whatever other health conditions having to take repeated courses of antibiotics, and there is this risk of C. diff infection when that happens. But that's not just like one course of amoxicillin and all of a sudden your microbiome is dead. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I'm glad you said that. And something that we've tackled, ad nauseum on Unbiased Science is, there are so many reasons why we caution against the overuse of antibiotics, but antibiotics remain one of the most incredible public health, discoveries and interventions. And when needed, they're incredible. But obviously, there can be problems if overused. What am I missing, Kristen and Sarah? Anything else? I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here, but anything else you wanted to tackle?
No, I think we did a pretty good job. We covered a lot of ground today. I think.
I agree, and I'm so proud of my doo-doo pun. I don't know. People, sorry. If nothing else, I hope that you all appreciate. I'm sorry, Kristen. Please.
On that note, I think.
But yes, Kristen. Thank you so much for joining us. It really is always such a pleasure to have you on. I kind of want you on all the time. You're amazing. You're such a wealth of information, and the way that you deliver information is just incredible. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess. That's so sweet. I'd be happy to come back. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of probiotic follow-up questions now that we've opened the probiotic can of worms.
Yes. All right, Sarah, want to take us home?
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Please be sure to follow Kristen on all of the social media platforms. We hope you learned a thing or two. I certainly did. She's quite knowledgeable. I recommend following her. Join us next week on your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.